everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Tribe Talk. This is our fourth episode, and this week we have the fantastic, wonderful woman, Juliet Gellatley. And if I may, I'll read out her bio and just introduce her to the people watching. So, Juliet Gellatley is founder and director of Viva, a vibrant, campaigning animal health and environmental group that is the biggest vegan charity in Europe. Viva launched in 1994, joined by Viva Poland in 2002. She was previously director of the Vegetarian Society of the UK. Juliet has created and launched numerous campaigns, investigated many farms, often the big names, and exposed the devastating animal cruelty that seems to hold no bounds in agribusiness, and written several reports, guides, and books, including the Silent Ark. She instigated the first vegan festivals almost 2 decades ago, which have mushroomed into events across Britain. In fact, Juliet has many British firsts to her name. The first to campaign on vegetarianism in the UK, to produce a vegan cinema ad, a vegan YouTube ad, to film factory farming to camera in face-offs, and to get exotic meats out of the UK supermarkets. She is producer of the award-winning Hogwood, a modern horror story documentary on Amazon Prime, and she has a degree in zoology and psychology and is a qualified nutritional therapist. Wow. I mean, that is epic. And I'm just stoked. We're stoked to have you on. So thank you very much.
No, it's a pleasure. It's nice of you to invite me.
Cliff, you got anything to say, my man?
Yeah, I just want to thank you so much for giving up your time to join us tonight. And we're just trying to do something good here. We've been in the middle of lockdown, I'm sure like yourself, for months and months and months. And we just thought we'd put the podcast together to try and do something good and try and get the message out another way when we can't really go on the streets and do our actions at the minute. So
really frustrating.
So thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to start with the questions?
Yeah, let's get to it. Cool. So, I mean, we want to ask you after this question about what led to you being vegan. So if you hold back a little, what we want to ask you first is about your formative years. And how you can see that sort of put you on the path to where you are now.
Okay, so I'm going back a very long time. Scrape the barrels of my memory here. It was quite poignant though, and I do remember it vividly actually, because I was quite a bolshy teenager, and I'd spent a few years sort of like caring for animals and rescuing animals, and my mum used to say, "You just fight for the underdog." That was her expression.
Oh.
But nobody I knew was vegetarian. I barely knew the word, to be honest. You have to remember, this is pre-Google, pre-people having home computers and phones and all the rest of it. And I got a leaflet on factory farming, and I was as upset by that than all the other issues that I'd been working on, which tended to be like anti-hunting and stuff like that at the time. And started arguing people, and they said, "Well, do you eat meat?" And I was thinking, yes, I do. And so all the accusations of hypocrisy and all the rest of it came into it, and I was thinking, wow, so okay, I've got to change this up. And then I thought, people were saying, well, it's not as bad as you're saying, and I thought, I've only seen one leaflet, so I need to see it for myself. And this is where the sort of bolshy teenager comes in. I thought it'd be relatively easy. Of course, it isn't that easy to get inside a proper factory farm. But through a friend of a friend, I actually went with an agricultural student and saw it firsthand for myself. It was in the Midlands of the UK, and an absolutely gigantic place, which was used as a showcase for farmers worldwide in terms of taking, as they saw it, factory farming forward economically. So we actually did have a guide in the pig shed who was, talking in agricultural economic terms to the person that I was with. And as you can imagine, by this stage, I was 14, 15, just completely, agog with what I was seeing in front of me, which then was hundreds of sows in what were called sow stalls, which is where the pregnant females were. Yeah. And I can remember really vividly looking at them closely and thinking, oh my God, you can't even lie down. When you read in a leaflet and say they have difficulty lying down, literally some of these females could not ever lie down. It was impossible because they're just in these metal cages that were too small for them throughout their whole pregnancy. Horrific. And I walked along the aisleway, and there were 4 boars who were huge animals. They're about the size of Shetland ponies. Factory farm pigs are very big animals. and one of them was in a particularly bad way, and he had a lame back leg, and he just dragged himself towards me at the front of his pen and looked me right in the eye, and I looked him right back in the eye, and I didn't know that was the start of Viva, of course, but really it was. So it was quite a dramatic moment. I remember saying I'm sorry repeatedly, and just looking around thinking, what do I do about this? This has to change. And rose-tinted spectacles, I thought, all I need to do is tell everybody, and everybody will change.
Jeez. Honeymoon period?
How did that work out?
Well, here we are today. I mean,
Still
you have
raging?
to remember, back then, you know, you're too young to remember, of course, but literally being vegetarian, because I went vegetarian first, was about having an omelette on a menu. Seriously, that was it. And then it moved to chili non carne. But it was so restrictive. It was quite difficult, you know, and people say, oh, it's easy. And of course I would joke that it was, but it wasn't really. So if you put things into perspective in terms of how things have changed to today in a very short period of history, in terms of human history, I'd say in the UK, yeah, finally we can really, excuse the pun, but taste the change.
I remember it very well, by the way. I'm in my mid-50s, so...
But you don't look it. Yeah. That's because you're vegan.
Yeah.
I can remember the only thing you could get was like soy mince in the local health food shop and just this dry mix of stuff and nothing else. And you had to make burgers and mince and all sorts of stuff. Very different than nowadays. But back then, I was vegetarian when I was young, Juliet, but I didn't even know what vegan was. I'd never heard the word or the phrase.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
And I remember going vegetarian and telling my family, and my mum was fairly horrified, to be honest. And it wasn't that she was lacking compassion because she loved animals. There was just literally no knowledge for the sort of bog standard person about it then. And people were genuinely convinced that you would be unhealthy. So it was quite an uphill struggle and battle, and you think all the campaigning that's gone on since then to change
all the science
attitudes.
It's crazy.
So it's an amazing change in the last few years, and it's great to see, but we have still such a long way to go. So
we have
just need to keep on fighting all the time. Our next question was, what was the catalyst to you becoming vegan, and why did you decide to use your voice for the animals? So I suppose you've already answered part of that.
Yes, I think it's a really interesting question, is why some people seem to be born campaigners almost, you know, on whatever level, whether it's local, national, whatever. It seems to be in your genes. I can remember feeling different to other people. I mean, you know, from as young as 6 years old, there was just an awareness that I had to do something about certain things. I didn't know it was going to be veganism, of course, at that young age, but it is an interesting question of why some people are driven. And I can remember one of my friends saying, you're so lucky because you believe in something. She said, don't you realize most people don't believe in anything? And I'd never really thought of it like that before, you know. But
Who
anyway,
said that to you?
It was one of my closest friends, actually.
Wow, that's really grim. And that was quite at a young age you heard that as well?
Yeah, well, I was a teenager by that point, and she was trying to decide her career. And it was just an interesting point in terms of, it was like, you know, you are different. You do realize that you care so much that most people just don't care about stuff. And anyway, I was by this point in my 20s, and there was at this point I was living in the countryside, so had farmers 360 degrees around me, actually. And in the field that was near my house, that my garden actually backed onto, a cow unusually gave birth to twins. One of them died, and the farmer took the other calf very young. And I remember going up the hill after him and the farm worker and saying, what's going to happen to this little calf? And he said, like the rest of them, they'll go for veal. Because at that point, this was pre-BSE, they were going off to places like Italy and France largely.
Yeah.
And I remember walking back into my house and opening the fridge and just pouring all the milk out, you know, down the sink instantly, thinking, what the hell am I doing? You know, and that was it. I was vegan from that point.
Wow.
It's amazing. I think from England, sending veal calves to the continent in North Africa is illegal, but they still send them from Ireland. So they come. Lots of them come across from Scotland on the ferries, and then they go down to Cork and Dublin, and then they send them off to Libya and
Yeah, I think it's getting worse
Algeria
here.
and places like that. Still happening to this day. So
Weren't they
Yeah.
talking recently about putting them on planes from Ireland?
yeah, there's plane loads of them. And
Crazy.
I know it's crazy when you say that, because when all the live exports demos went, on they were on, I remember this so clearly for obvious reasons, but we actually had the live exports demos on the national news every day for about 6 months. There's never been support like that from media
Epic
before or
campaign, yeah.
since. And they were from Coventry. The calves were live exported there by plane. And it does seem extraordinary. You can't imagine that being true, but yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
very, very sad. We have a local market like 5 miles from my house, and on a Friday morning they have what's called a drop calf market. You'll be familiar with the term, maybe some people listening aren't. So drop calves are the male calves, and they're like 10 days old, Juliet. I've been there and filmed them, hundreds of them on a Friday morning, with little tiny souls, going
sad.
for veal or going to some of them go straight to the slaughterhouse across the road. So sad, so terribly sad.
It's terribly sad. We did a campaign that we called Trash. We had like billboards up on places like the M6, which are really, really busy, and did a film which was, again, one of the first YouTube films that was really pushing veganism. It was so successful. In fact, we're going back to that and updating it because it's just really popular in terms of influencing people, I mean. But that hones in on the male calves as this unwanted byproduct of the dairy industry. And it's really, really hard, as you can imagine, to actually prove that, as in film, that going on. But we managed to do it, and the supplier was to Cadbury, one of the biggest dairy users, of course, in the whole world. And we subsequently I went on myself, actually, with some of my colleagues, and we filmed in several farms, and several of them were Cadbury, Arla. So they're all the big names. But you're right, you see all these little calves lined up in these little boxes, which they call them hutches. And you go to them and you put your hand out, and they're desperately sucking at your fingers and just looking at you and crying. And then you can hear the mothers, sort of often just only meters away in the big sheds, crying to them. And they're just uncomprehending little creatures that don't know why what's happening to them is happening. And you think you have to be a particularly heartless person that's the way you live your life, separating mother and baby. I mean, how do people do that? How do they take the shotgun to the head as well?
It's terrible, and some of them here, like, it's almost too horrific to talk about. They will just lay them on the ground and hit them over the head with a spade or a shovel when they're like less than a day old, just to get rid of them, because
it just freaks me out. Like,
horrendous.
People can be born into anything, and just because they're born into it and people are supportive around them, literally anything can be mentally justified because it's the way you grew up, regardless if it's like handing children guns in foreign lands or whatever, killing baby animals with hammers. It's insane. It's so crazy.
It is insane. I mean, you've got this massive influence of parent over child, of course, which is absolutely gigantic until the child is at least 7 years old. So there's a massive influence there. But nevertheless, people do stand out, don't they, from their parents? I remember giving a school talk. You're talking about the past. Well, the start of my real career in all these issues was working with teenagers, which I loved, actually. And I've given hundreds of talks to literally thousands and thousands of young people. And I remember this girl coming up to me, and she was in tears. By the way, my talks didn't usually make people cry, but she was in tears, and it was because her father was an intensive pig farmer. And so she knew that I was telling the truth because, of course, she was living it. And she came up to me and said, I want to go vegetarian and my father won't let me. And I stayed in touch with her, and I got a letter about 4 months later, and she'd done it, and her father was eating her meals a lot of the time.
Wow.
So she'd gone from a situation where he completely was going mental with her over it to even somebody like that starting to turn around. And I remember at Viva years ago, we had a butcher who'd been a butcher all his life. He was in his 70s, and he couldn't stop apologizing for the life that he'd led. Another guy who opened a B&B, which was vegan in the Lake District, he just walked out of his job butchering animals. Just suddenly, just this shining moment, literally just put the knife down and walked out and never went back, and has spent his life making up for it. Wow. So clearly we're capable of rejecting what's gone before.
Yeah. We're just programmed from when we're young, but I mean, we are capable of breaking the program and learning a new story.
We are.
For sure. Yeah.
Which is why it's so important to campaign. You know, I mean, providing food is really important, obviously, and all these companies opening left, right, and centre is absolutely vital in terms of especially getting meat reducers, you know, to try the foods. It makes it so much easier for us to do our job. But at the end of the day, people need to understand the reality of the issues and why they're so important. So we need people, you know, to commit to veganism for whatever reason motivates them the most. For me, as you will gathered, it's animals. You know, for other people, it's planetary destruction. For other people, they come in through health. But usually, as you well know, once you change, you kind of all those issues play some kind of role in your thinking. But it's really important to campaign on, you know, like you do on a local level, on a national level, on an international level, just whatever you can do and however you can do it. Because the doors, you know, for most people is at least slightly ajar now. You know, we're pushing at something where people are much more understanding that there is a real need for us to change as society.
There's less of an excuse because the information is so accessible and everyone kind of knows that.
Yeah, and the investigations, you'll know, I mean, in just the last 5 years, when I started Viva, there was barely anybody doing investigations. We were one of the first to broach all this new territory. You know, now it almost feels like there's another investigation weekly. So the information, you know, it's out there pretty much all the time on social media.
It's great. Talking about
no, go ahead.
Yeah, just on that note about talking about investigations, could you tell us a bit more about the work that Viva does then? Because we know that you're quite like in farm investigations is one of your things for sure, and you would be known for that. Just sort of maybe secondary or whatever else.
So I our raison d'etre probably has always been investigations, and we sort of kind of led the way on that. I've always believed that you have to tell the truth. As soon as you start to compromise your message, there really is no point in going on. This is for me, and this is my belief. Obviously, other organisations do things differently. I think you just have to tell the whole truth, and that the solution is being vegan. At the same time, I encourage people to take a step-by-step approach if that's the way that they're going to get there. I don't sort of like want to whip somebody and tell them off because they're not vegan yet. You know what I mean? I don't have that approach at all. It's much more carrot than stick. But to get them on that,
would we?
Sorry.
50-50.
To get them on that road of compassion, as I call it, you have to tell people the truth and not back off from that. And to do that, you have to expose the reality of what is happening. You know, 1 billion animals in the UK, or land animals, are killed, and how many fish and other water animals are killed on top of that. It's trillions, actually. The numbers are just scary. And then you have to look at the way that those animals are killed and if there's any necessity to kill them in the first place and everything that goes with that. And that's what Viva has always been about, exposing. So, of course, we've exposed. I can remember one of the first big exposes I did in terms of the name was Bernard Matthews. At Christmas time, and I remember the Daily Mail actually ran it as a front page story, which was extraordinary because it's not often you get exposes on front pages of nationals. But I can remember, you know, going into a place like that, and the poor birds, you couldn't even move through them without stepping on them, you know. So you literally couldn't move because they were that tightly packed. They're very big animals. Turkey's much bigger than people realise. And you know, they just had nowhere to go, and they're dead, and they're dying, and the disease, and they couldn't get to the water, and they couldn't get to the feed by this point, and all the rest of it. And then we rescued turkeys, and that's when it all starts to come home to you, because how many of actually us know turkeys as personalities, as individuals? Of course, it's not what we're exposed to. And if kids, you know, kept turkeys as, you know, pets in the way that they do dogs and cats, then there's no way we could do what we do to them. You know, turkeys, they're so intelligent and curious. In fact, of all animals that I've known that they're most like, it's dogs. You know, they want to be with you. They're very nosy. You know, they want affection. They want to be massaged. They're lovely, lovely, intelligent, bright animals. And so, yeah, my work has sort of enabled me. I've had the privilege of getting to know some amazing animals over the years, but at the same time, that's made it the work that I do more difficult in many ways, because I go to somewhere like Hogwood and I think about, you know, the animals we rescued. It's it's harsh, but the
You're
world is
the
changing.
you're the second or third person I've heard saying that about turkeys. So I spoke to somebody who worked in a sanctuary one time, and she said that it's a sanctuary where people can come and interact and meet the animals. And she said that when they meet the turkeys, they're the ones that make them make the connection the most, because they're so inquisitive, and just the personalities are just unbelievable.
They are supremely intelligent. I mean, we accept, don't we? Again, in Britain, we have this thing about wild birds. In fact, you know, a substantial number of British people feed wild birds to keep them alive through the winter and enjoy watching them. And yet we have this cut-off when it comes to turkeys and chickens, which the industry obviously encourages to think of chickens as stupid. They're far from stupid. You know, we accept that crows, although they get very maligned birds, we accept that they're probably on a par with some primates in terms of intelligence.
Yeah.
And yet there's a long way to go in terms of people understanding that turkeys are actually equally bright. They're incredibly inquisitive, intelligent animals with very complicated vocalizations and languages. I mean, I found it staggering because of my ignorance too. I didn't realize, you know, how complicated they are. But very loving birds as well. You see, how do you get a sense of that from just the leaflet that you're putting across to people? Turkeys are very affectionate animals. You know, they seek your love.
Well, most people, the only time they ever see a turkey is when they go into a supermarket and buy one out of the freezer section. It's just an enormous cut-off. Blind spot
People just
for
need
most
to meet
people.
animals more. Eat them and not eat them.
You mentioned hogwood there. So we wanted to ask you about your farm investigations, like Flathouse Farm and hogwood, and maybe you could tell our audience how those investigations came about and what you personally witnessed yourself.
Well, hogwood actually came about through complaints from locals about the pig farm, which is near Stratford-upon-Avon, and we decided, well, I sent an investigator to see how bad the place was, and he came back and said really bad. And at that point, there were just adults laid outside, dead, with blood coming out of their nostrils and their mouths, severe overcrowding and so forth. So I decided, I went back myself with a couple of female colleagues and this male investigator. So there's 4 of us actually. And I walked into this place, and I always remember, because again, this was a very similar time to when we'd rescued Hope and her 6 babies. And the piglets that we walked into the first shed, it was a very old-fashioned shed. They were just all together. There was no compartmentalizing the animals. So there was hundreds of them in this building on the floor. And I remember thinking, God, these animals could never sleep, because I just stood just quietly watching them, and those in the distance, you could see that they would be trampled as soon as they tried to sleep. And I'd never even really thought about that myself in terms of the torture that factory farming is. And there was all this sort of nebulous sense that these animals knew, you just could sense it, that they knew something was better. So we opened the doors, and you know, they got that smell of fresh air and the night and the stars. And and all these little eyes looking at you, and they all then crowd round you, and they try to nibble at your feet, and they're looking at you, and they're desperate for something to play with, because of course, talking about intelligence, you know, pigs are very intelligent animals, and they're so bored and frustrated. And then we went to the next shed.
Intelligent animal in the world, isn't it?
They're really intelligent. So I mean, all mammals are very intelligent, and all birds are very intelligent, but they are. I mean, when we rescued Hope, some of the things to do with her communication with her 6 babies were just incredible. It was so sophisticated. It was just amazing. So, for example, she could call her 3 boys and not the 3 girls in one go. I didn't know pigs were capable of doing that.
Amazing.
It was amazing. If you want to know how I know that, you can ask me later. But anyway, so in terms of hogwood, we found out that from a neighbour of this farm that I don't like calling them farm. It has too much of a sort of an idyllic, you know, this unit, you call it this industrial unit. Said, did you know that they supply Tesco? And I went, really? And I thought actually it was so bad because we'd seen, again, I remember kneeling by an animal, because the excuses farmers give is, well, when you're producing meat from thousands of animals, it's bound to go wrong in the tiny minority of cases. Of course it is. That's just part of the economics of factory farming. Government accepts that, and as long as it's not a common thing, then it's just something we all have to accept. So the vision being that if one animal becomes ill, they will put that animal to sleep and out of his or her misery. And I was sitting on the floor with this pig who had an ulceration that was so deep it'd gone through to the bone, and all the tissue had gone black necrotic. That did not happen overnight, over 1 day, 2 days, 1 week. And this animal, and what agony this poor creature had been left in. And then another one was being cannibalized. Another one that was dead and the entrails were coming out was also being cannibalized. Another one was, flailing on the floor. She was in so much trouble. And so it goes on. I won't describe anymore. You get the picture. So I thought Tesco would withdraw, actually, because I thought our footage was so powerful that they would just drop it. And that's why we decided to make the Hogwood documentary. It was to try and get across to the British public. They have got this, again, idyllic idea that if you expose something that's wrong, and surely to God, Britain can't be that bad, then something will be done about it. And it's that dawning realization that you can call the RSPCA in and they will go in and inspect. But the law is so weak when it comes to farmed animals that what's happening was legal, basically. Red Tractor, defended the farm, believe it or not. The National Pig Association defended them and sent a press person to defend it. And so we went back in the following year, and cut the story short, we also went back in again, which was very difficult because the places like Fort Knox had spent tens and tens of thousands on security. But we did manage to go back in, only this time left hidden cameras, and it was that made Tesco withdraw, because the hidden cameras filmed men actually hitting animals. And Tesco just couldn't withstand the bad PR from that and justify it any longer. But it took that to, rather than the abject misery these animals in and the clear pain. So Tesco withdrew, Red Tractor then withdrew, Cranswick Foods, which is one of the largest pork suppliers in Britain, in fact in Europe,
we know
they said they would never work with Hogwood again. So there were some successes along the way from this campaign, but we wanted to show people that we've still not closed the place down. Hogwood still exists. Why the hell does it exist? These places, the government, the APHA should be closing these places down once they've done these investigations. We find trading standards. People say who should close them down. So we report to everybody. Trading standards are totally useless, absolutely useless. In fact, in the case of Flat House, which if anything is worse than Hogwood, believe it or not, another mega pig farm, they didn't even open the footage. They didn't even look at it. I just really want people to understand that even though we go in and investigate, we don't have the powers in the UK. We have different powers in Poland, by the way. We've managed to get much stronger powers to actually close places down. And in Poland, we've now got powers to actually take animals. It's not easy. You have to jump through all these legal hoops. But we have rescued foxes from fur farms with the police there present.
Wow,
and other
that's
animals
amazing.
as well.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah.
That's like a right to rescue law then?
Yeah.
There's certain places in America now, I think they push that through as well, that if you see an animal that's suffering, you have the right to go in and do something about it. But unfortunately, we don't have that right.
But just to say, of course, the industry's trying to take those rights away in Poland.
Yeah.
So
It's crazy because
nothing's easy. We fight for everything.
You have to go down these routes that are rigged from the beginning, and all the paperwork and terms and conditions is geared to be in favor of oppressing animals.
Exactly.
And it disturbs me so much, because we were on a pig farm one time, and for you to say that you've done investigations and you record objective cruelty and neglect, it's not enough unless you've got footage of humans inflicting that, as if where else did it come from without showing people on camera doing that. I mean, it's so insulting to the innocence of.
It was this time last year. It was Meet the Victims, Northern Ireland. They organised an action, and we went onto a farm.
We've seen some
quite close to where I live, actually.
Pigs cannibalising each other.
People went into it in the middle of the night. and all taking footage and live streaming it on Facebook and stuff. And everything you described at Hogwood is everything we witnessed.
Yeah.
The smell and the stench in the place was horrendous. The pigs were covered in their own filth and shit. Some of them had gaping wounds like the size of a football, and other ones had been eaten at them. There was dead pigs lying all over the farm, which of course the farmer said that we did on the way in.
Yeah, he tried to say we dragged them and left them there.
It's unbelievable. It's a common line.
Even though the bloodstains are black.
Yeah, I know. We filmed
so
a wheelbarrow full, one of those big industrial size ones, full of dead piglets covered in thousands of maggots, and they said we'd planted it. And you just, and it's so utterly ridiculous. You can't make it up. And the farmer even provided so-called footage of us of people dressed in these suits that weren't ours. So they were actually prepared to actually make up footage as well. They will go to any lengths to defend it. And let me just say, before I forget, that Tesco, by the way, told a colleague who worked for Tesco, quite high up actually, and it was all about what exactly, this won't surprise you, because of course it's all about money at the end of the day. But they said if we relinquish to Viva, this is why they didn't do it in 2017 or 18. They said exactly what you've just said. It's because this is pig farming. So Viva will just go on and expose the next. And it's like a domino effect. And they didn't want that. So it was an acknowledgement, sadly, by Tesco that this is pig farming for the UK. Isn't that terrible? And we were showing the footage to people. We'd done lots of city tours with it, and we did 3D versions and stuff like that. And you get people from every walk of life, men of every age, women of every age, from all different backgrounds, and people are crying on the streets, with us filming them and saying what, and they just cannot believe. Despite what we've said about things being seen on social media, you have to remember that a lot of people choose not to look at that stuff. So a lot of people really don't know what is going on and cannot believe this is legal and happening in the UK. And it is quite hard to believe when you stand outside these places, or you stand outside a slaughterhouse and you hear them screaming and you're thinking, Jesus, this is 2021 and this is still happening. And like you said, there's this massive disassociation that we're encouraged to believe. I was just looking for something that I'm doing at the moment at the advertising to children of companies like McDonald's, and I had forgotten, to be honest, how incredible and powerful their marketing is to kids. They use every entertainment company that is important to a child, every single one, to market McDonald's meals. So you're looking at everything from over the past few years, Mario to Soul to Shrek, to every film that you can think of. They're producing toys relating to that film. And they advertise to the kids from 2 years old, and it's all about fun. So it's not about selling the food; it's about selling fun and happiness, and it works. It really, really works. So the parents go along; they encourage this. It keeps the child quiet, and some of those characters that they're selling the McNuggets or whatever to, they're chickens and they're cows and they're pigs, and so society's encouraging this massive disassociation between what's real and what's not. And the schools don't really exactly help. Yes, I did a massive program of school talks, but you're talking about the kids are 14 by this point, all the way through primary school. Why aren't we telling kids the truth about where food comes from and what the consequences are of consuming animals? And even me saying that out loud, even people on our own side get a little bit uneasy about it. What? We tell people that 7-year-olds, that animals are factory farmed and that show that a knife going into their neck and them bleeding to death. Well, if it's so horrible, then why are we doing it?
Yeah. Why are we trying to sell it as happiness, the complete antithesis to the truth?
And parents are actively lying to their kids as well. I've witnessed it where, we've done a campaign one day and we had a chicken on a poster, I think, and the kid was eating chicken nuggets, and she said to her mum, "Is that the same chicken that I'm eating?" And she goes, "No, darling, no, it's not, no." So she's actively having to lie to her child to get her to, because she could see the child was doing the connection in her head, and I was just like, is this where we've got to, that we're actually lying to kids instead of telling them the truth? Which is kind of what your point
I can remember this with a 6-year-old, exactly the same thing. A little girl called Catherine, and she just asked a question about, and I can't remember how it came up, about me and my diet. And I said, well, where do you think, the pork comes from, or the ham that comes from, that's in your sandwich? And she said, the fridge. And I said, yes, but before that, how did it get there? And she looked at her mum, and her mum went, no. It's this thing, don't tell her the truth. And I thought, nah, sorry, it just doesn't wash. I said, that ham is from a pig. And I said to the mum, look, this is just basic stuff. You cannot hide this from her. Whether you choose to tell her the truth of how pigs are kept and how they're killed, that's up to you. But I'm not going to actually say this is not from an animal.
Yeah.
And this little girl went, it's not a pig. It's
Oh my
not
God.
a pig. She was so, and I said, it is a pig. I think you need to talk to your mum about this. And
Cognitive
It's
dissonance,
it's just
isn't it?
that, again, this encouragement that you have to actually lie to your child rather than be able
And
to
that's
tell them
almost
these basic things about food.
that's almost a sinister lie, because the tooth fairy and Santa Claus, you could argue that when you're not
Mm.
really doing a lot of harm. But that's, I mean, I was told the same lie, and you were told the same lie, and you were told the same lie, and then you get duped into doing something that in your heart you don't really want to do.
Mm.
That's how I feel about it. Anyway, I feel like I was lied to when I was young. And I'm not blaming my parents or anything like that. It's just the way it was.
But societal pressure is huge,
Yeah.
isn't it? When you go to school and your parents are the people that you completely rely on, you're totally dependent on them, so you trust them. Of course you do. And then you go to school, and back then everybody around you is eating animals, and it's normalized. And then it comes to the point where if you're the one standing out, you're made to feel very uncomfortable indeed sometimes. And I went through that myself, in not so much with my diet, it was more with protesting dissection and vivisection, because, as you mentioned, my degree was zoology. And boy, oh boy, they really make you feel like you're the outsider. So there are strategies that people use without even knowing consciously that they're doing it.
Yeah. I can remember at school we had to dissect rats, and I refused to do it. This is when I was 16. And I wasn't vegan at the time. I just thought, no, I'm not doing this. So I was made to stand outside the classroom door while everybody else. But I was happy enough to do that at the time. I didn't want to see people putting the rats up.
Yeah.
But yeah, everything's just normalized. It's a crazy world.
It is, but I mean, like like we said at the start, it is changing so much. And for example, we do university. Well, COVID kind of put the kibosh on this, but we were doing university tours and really starting to invest a lot of our time and money into it, getting donations from it. For it, sorry, not from it, definitely not from it. And it was like, in some of the universities we went to, we'd be talking to like literally several hundred, even 1,000 students in over, say, a 2-day period. So it's very intense. But the response from it was so positive, where there wasn't barely a single student who tried to defend consuming animals. What they didn't know was that much about the issues themselves, but they were very, very hungry for knowledge. And that is a big change, because we've dealt with students a lot over the years. And I remember thinking, my God, our job is starting to pull off here, because there are real tangible changes happening here, a real desire for knowledge, and an acceptance that change is needed, and that veganism is part of the solution for the planet. It was there with them. So things are changing, and it is generational. Of course it is.
And social media is our friend now. I think that's the main reason for the change. The information's out there that you didn't have.
I mean, we used to, even before me setting up Viva, the budget that we had, you have to remember, to actually advertise, you were looking really at print ads back then. And in a national newspaper, half a page was £10,000. And how many charities had that kind of budget to sustain any kind of real presence, versus what was then called the Meat and Livestock Commission, who had budgets given by government of millions. And so the differential between the sizes of the two sides was so gigantic. It was a real David and Goliath situation. And social media actually changed that so much for us, because suddenly we had access to so many people for very, very relatively little cost, and we were on a much more even playing field. And when you think about it, in, say, even just the last 5 years, that playing field has really started to even out the score. I mean, we've got a huge job. You have to remember, there's 60 odd million people in the UK. and you're looking at, say, 10 million of those now who are vegetarian or vegan. So say around 8 million vegetarian, 2 million vegan, depending on which survey you look at. But then on top of that, you're looking at many millions of people who are so-called flexitarians. So the industry is very well aware. And if you listen to the industry, I don't know if you get stuff through from the industry, but I do. It actually gives you hope, because they're talking about change all the time, and there's an acceptance. It's not for animals, by the way; it's for the environment. There is an actual acceptance now by industry that they cannot continue. They know their days are numbered. They really do.
Yeah. I keep my eye on Farmers Weekly and a few other publications, and I've noticed some of the narrative starting to switch. One of them in Farmers Weekly was the language. It was something similar to the fact that they're aware that they don't really have a concrete argument anymore for, I believe they use the word cruelty when it comes to male dairy calves. They're aware that that's just indefensible these days, and they were talking about, like sexing
semen and stuff.
Yeah, beforehand. So they're definitely aware that a lot of people are onto them, and they know they're in the light in that way now. So I know we've been talking a lot of heavy stuff here, but there's definitely been a lot of tremendous change happening at the same time. So it's good. It's good.
Would you mind? There's a viewer question here, Julia. We had other questions up, but do you mind if we ask this one here, because I think it's an important
Go
one?
ahead.
I'm going to put it on the screen. So it's Kay Green, and she's wondering, in your experience, what's the best method of convincing someone to go vegan on a person-to-person basis? She's got some friends whose values seem to line up with veganism, but they haven't made the switch yet.
Great question.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, because some people, as Viva, obviously we've changed so many people, but on an individual level, going back to my own family, so something very personal, certain members of my own family literally changed overnight when I changed them, and my dad, just as another example, took 20 years. So people certainly move at their own pace, but he did change. I have found over the years that it's hard to answer that question definitively. I know you want a definitive answer, but if there's the silver bullet, of course we'd have used it and would have changed the world. So it does depend so much on that individual and what motivates them and what concerns them. But let's presume that they're a normal, compassionate person. I would get them to sit down and watch Hogwood, the documentary we've been just talking about, because it doesn't just talk about that pig farm. It then widens out to the whole world and looks at the environmental impact, the pandemic impact of factory farming, the antibiotic resistance, and these arguments. It's only a documentary. It's only about 35 minutes, so it's not a long one. It's a relatively short one for people. It's not like 2 hours or something. It's relatively short for a documentary, but everybody that has watched it has changed to some degree. I'm not going to claim that everybody has gone vegan, but it is incredibly, I don't know, it just seems to get under people's skin and really reach their heart. So I'd say if you can get them to watch that. You might say then, how do I get them to watch Hogwood?
Yeah,
again,
that's what I was thinking.
It depends again so much on the person. So, I mean, in my life, I've done things. Sorry, I was just thinking of something. Yeah, a trick.
Go for it.
Yeah, sorry. Depends who you're talking about, whether it's your boyfriend or whoever. But you can do quid pro quos, literally, where you say, I'll do this for you if you do this for me. And you can make it fun, actually, those quid pro quos. Seriously.
Do you want to tell us what that offer was?
No, I don't. That'll be the only bit of this interview that people remember. I've embarrassed myself terribly now.
So let me see.
Limits people's imaginations. People are going to go, oh my God, what did you get up to?
Let me see. So 2 campaigns: End Factory Farming Before It Ends Us and Slice the Risk.
Yes.
Elaborate on those.
So obviously, last year we were like everybody, everything was just completely thrown out. We had our campaign plan all set in place, and of course COVID emerges. So in fact, partly because of my degree, I threw myself into the research with Dr. Justine Butler for the 3 and 4 campaign, which is all about how, because back then, of course, everyone's heard of the word zoonotic now, but they hadn't. which is about how viruses or bacteria jump from animals to people and what are the main causes of that. So I was researching that. We produced the coronavirus page and the campaign, and that was really successful. I did a lot of media, a lot of podcasts for mainstream audiences. And then spinning out of that, I really wanted to say, look, going vegan is the best way to protect yourself in terms of reducing the chance of severe COVID. Obviously, we were not saying vegans get less COVID or anything like that. But what we were saying was most people who die from it, they have underlying diseases. So it's like obesity, heart disease, diabetes, kidney disease. And we researched this really, really well with two of my colleagues. Provided all of the evidence and produced the campaign, which was just called Slash the Risk. And then we went in that campaign from the two angles, the health ones, which I've just mentioned, and why veganism is such a healthy diet that we thrive upon and reduces the risk. But also the other really serious angle of it was how factory farming is likely to be the cause of another pandemic. And I've talked to a lot of scientists now, infectious disease specialists, and honestly, I don't want to, it's awful. It sounds terribly dramatic, but especially when we're just kind of seeing the light at the end of this tunnel. But they're all saying when the next pandemic happens and it's likely to be bird flu. They're not saying if.
Not if.
And so we were trying to explain why factory farming is so dangerous. And so the big campaign that we're working on now, which is an ongoing major long-term campaign, is End Factory Farming Before It Ends Us. So that campaign is looking at factory farming, yes, from the animals angle, of course, cruelty, but also from things like the risk of disease, not just pandemics, but antibiotic resistance, which is such a major worry, which pretty much all scientists accept is something that needs seriously doing
something like 85 or 90% of all antibiotics used in the world are used on farmed animals.
Yeah, it's the majority. It's about 4/5 if you look at the whole world. If you look at Britain, it's about 1/3. Whatever the statistics for the world are, So just to explain to people what that means is that because the world is farming so many billions of animals to get them through and to increase their weight, even though they're not supposed to be doing it for that reason. Of course, we know that they are. But to get them through to slaughter weight, they give them antibiotics as routine, as part of their feed. And that is creating bacteria that are resistant to those antibiotics. So they may pass that resistance on to completely unrelated species that live inside us and create massive problems if they cause an illness, i.e. we can't treat it with antibiotics. Or if you get a food poisoning bacteria like E. coli has produced a multi-resistant strain now, which is very serious indeed. So it is one of the issues that worries the medical profession probably more than anything else. It's not apocalyptic in the sense of a pandemic because we did survive pre-antibiotics, of course. But for society to move backwards, it's going to be a very hard transition to go from accepting that antibiotics were there. So when you had an operation, you could actually have one, because they're given routinely, of course, to stop you getting infected, to not being able to have those routine operations. It's going to be a very hard transition for the human race to make.
It's just another one of those red flags that isn't talked about in mainstream media or education enough.
Absolutely.
So many reasons to go vegan.
Many.
Yeah. And I just want to say at this point, listening to you speak has just been an absolute joy so far. It's awesome. I'm really enjoying it myself, even though it's been absolutely fantastic. We just have 3 or 4 more quick questions. We'll not keep you too long because I know you probably want to get about your evening. So your book, The Silent Ark, was published in 1996, I think, for the first time. Yeah, which is a testament to how much of your life you have dedicated and committed to helping the animals. It's amazing. So we wanted to ask you what changes in the movement and in veganism in general you've seen in those 25 years or so.
I think in terms of activism, it's funny actually because activism can sort of go in waves. And things do go in and out of fashion actually. So for example, I can remember early on in Viva, getting people to do, for example, local marches and protests was relatively easy. And then we went through a phase where it was almost impossible to get people on the streets. It just completely went out of fashion. And I'd say a lot of good things have happened recently with a lot of local movements. that have been triggered to some degree by documentaries like Earthlings, for example, which have span across the world, and there's a lot more global cooperation again because of social media, which we just didn't have the capabilities of that pre-social media. So there's lots of things that have spun out of the digital age that are really, really positive. So although, through lockdown, people have been trying to be imaginative using digital ways of campaigning, we also use social media as ways of actually reaching people to get them out on the streets. So we've found that relatively easier in the last 5 years than we had done for the 5 years previous to that. I've also, from Viva's perspective, I think there's more cooperation between groups now. So just on a personal level, I've formed sort of like a local support group with other national CEOs of organisations that are similar to Viva. So there's not so much preciousness about what you're doing. We're much more open, and we'll talk about the campaigning more openly, and on a personal level, are more supportive. So, for example, I went with Animal Aid and Animal Equality to meet the police when we were looking at, we were really worried about laws in terms of lack of freedom of speech, and I'm worried about that all over again now. But anyway, it's just an example that, we will very quickly form together and do stuff together, which perhaps wasn't happening so much before in years gone by. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the changes have come about in terms of encouraging people on a local level. You can encourage people to do things that, again, because of the digital age, that they couldn't have done before. So you just mentioned Meet the Meat. That's really possible, again, because of social media, because you can get things out there, because people can watch you live on different social media platforms. And when Meet the Meat was first kind of invented, if you like, we supported the people that were doing that. So it makes it, I suppose what I'm trying to say is, quite exciting times, because I think the possibilities are much wider for people on a local level without much funding to actually have a real impact.
Yeah. We actually well, there's so many ways of doing activism now, but one of the ways it's most effective for us, we have like 4 big widescreen TVs, and we can go on the street and show the footage on it, because people will always say, but that doesn't happen here. It never happens anywhere, apparently. But we can actually show, it's crazy, but we can show people, like, no, it does happen here, and here's the footage of it.
We can look it up.
And it's very hard for people to argue when they can see it in front of them.
I agree, actually. That local campaigning is really important. When we did Flat House, again, COVID made it very difficult, but we did eventually manage to go to Leicester city centre, which is the nearest city to the farm. And it did have a big impact, precisely because it's down the road. And I think that is really good. If you can get people campaigning all over the UK, and showing footage of something that is nearby, people are much more likely to take notice. And then, of course, you can widen the whole argument, like the Hogwood documentary does. It widens it to a global argument, and you've got people like Joseph Poor on there, who doesn't really do any media very much for anybody.
Just publishes boss papers.
Yeah, so he's from Oxford University, and he's very fiercely intelligent man, but he's the one who produced probably one of the most respected papers in the world, showing that animal agriculture is the most damaging to the environment. In fact, he went vegan because of that work. He didn't know he was going to find what he found. But it's influenced a lot of scientists.
I think he was looking into that to come up with sustainable meat and dairy production initially, and then realized there's no such thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful.
Exactly.
Kind of one of them moments. Do you want to go with that?
Yeah. Let me see. Public speaking, then. Yeah. I guess that's a bit different from investigations and writing. How did you come to feel that you had an affinity for that? From one medium to another, and is that something that came naturally to you, or something you just wanted to do and pushed yourself to do it?
For many years, I trained other people to do public speaking, and the reason that I wanted to do that was to empower people. Obviously, again, it's something you're just giving your time, really. Was because when I first started public speaking, I was so nervous. One of my sons, Jazz, did a speech at Camp Out in 2000.
Nice.
Well, it's pre-COVID, so 2019, and he was 16 or 17 at the time, and spoke in front of about 400 people. and
Wow.
it absolutely blew me away. It was practically the first time he'd done a public speech, and he was laughing with the audience. And I thought, wow,
That's
you
amazing.
bugger,
That's
because
amazing.
I
Very
wasn't,
comfortable.
I was just, it reminded me, my first real speech that I gave, I was thrown in the deep end for the organisation I then worked for, because nobody else in the office would go, and I just thought, Jesus, I can't do this, I'm terrified. And I just thought, we can't let this opportunity go. It's just too big an opportunity. So there's about 200 students. I was only about 2 years older than them. And it was a debate
Wow.
format, which made it more nerve-wracking. But I
Oh,
can
it's
remember,
intense.
it was intense. And there's this microphone system, and it's all very modern. And my voice literally shakes through the whole thing. And it did not... So that was my first experience of public speaking, and the reason I'm telling you that is, anyone listening to this, it really is one of those cases. Look, if I can do it, I mean, public speaking is one of the things I enjoy most out of my work. Actually, I engage with the audiences. I really love doing it. It's just experience, and you realize that nothing bad is going to happen. And if you don't know the answer to the question, it really doesn't matter. You just fess up, and these are just people. They want to hear what you have to say. And even if they're anti what you have to say, you can still end up having a good laugh with them and turning them around.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. Now, when I do television, which I would have got really nervous about once, I just think to myself, I do not care about the presenter. I will actively sometimes I even write myself notes in front of me. I don't care about the presenter. It's just the people watching this program. So I try and blank out, no matter how horrible they are to me, which has happened quite a lot. And I just think I'm just talking to those people out there, and they're just ordinary people who are interested, because veganism and all the issues around it are fascinating.
Yeah.
So, to be honest, with public speaking, completely candid, of course, this is no surprise. To get good at it, you need to keep doing it. You have to keep throwing yourself in the deep end.
Just on that, you're down to Spigot Camp Out this year. That's right, yeah.
I am. Yeah, you see, I love Camp Out. I just love the atmosphere. How what?
And you're going to be speaking to hundreds of people. Is that a daunting prospect for you, or is that?
No, I love it.
Cool?
Now I love it. But I've been at it a long time. Remember? no, I love it.
That's so good. Yeah, I got my tickets, so I'll hopefully see you there if it all goes well.
I know. You don't rely on anything at the moment. I don't presume anything, but it'd be so disappointing, nevertheless, if it doesn't go ahead this time.
Let's hope. Mm-hmm. We have just two more quick questions for you. We're at the hour mark now, and I'm aware we've kept you much longer than we probably should have, but it's been so interesting to talk to you. So we wanted to ask you, what do you think is the most effective form of activism in your experience? Or is there one?
It's like that the person who asked about how do you get someone to go vegan, because if they've just had a major heart attack, I've been told they've got high blood pressure and they really better get it down. I've changed their diet through those selfish routes, and then they've opened out to other issues. And it's the same with activism. How can you say what is going to work for one person is going to work for the rest? What you do through experience, I've found that broadly speaking, what works tends to vary according to the age group that you're speaking to and how you present it. So, for example, with secondary school age kids, it was always animal cruelty, and it still is animal cruelty, even ahead of the environment and everything that's happened. They just cannot bear seeing animals put through what they're put through. And even I found those children and teenagers that laugh, which is, maybe sort of like a small cohort of boys, when you actually talk to them on their own out of the class, or actually, I would have the confidence to not make fun of them in any way. I'd just start asking them questions in front of the class. And you actually find they don't actually find the cruelty funny. They're just either embarrassed by their own emotions because they don't know quite how to display their abhorrence in front of a class.
It's almost a defense mechanism.
It is a defense mechanism.
Well put. It's a good way.
It is. So in answer to your question, if you're talking to a teenage audience or a student audience, what happens to the animals is incredibly effective activism. So with students, for example, when we did the last tour, we took the 360-degree goggles, and that really attracted them, and we got lots of conversations going. And we also appealed to them through their stomach. So we had a Viva shake stall, which was all the different types of vegan shakes, and that opened up conversations. We're doing a different version of that, providing we can, September, October this year during the Freshers Fair. So we're going at students through the two-pronged approach, which is their stomach, but also through their heart. And animals first and foremost. As people get older and they kind of get more stuck in their ways, as the saying goes, it depends again where you are and where they are in their lifestyle and what argument they are most open to as to what turns them on and turns them off. I'd say, largely speaking, if you're going to a more middle-aged audience, then I have found anyway that it's quite complex, but obviously health issues are more likely to play a role in terms of influencing them. But also, to be honest, I found all three issues. It's a more complicated audience to actually convince in some ways. If you're talking... Again, it depends where you are, what situation in. So, for example, the more you can target your activism, the better. So if you're going to an environmental conference, then obviously the people who are attracted to it, you should go in with the vegan environmental issues. Obviously, you should play on your strengths. So it depends on where it is that you're standing, what it is that you're focusing on, why you've chosen that audience. I think sometimes with activists, they perhaps don't think that through enough. Think about the audience and what it is they expect to happen. Because the more you can tailor your message, the more effective you will be. So, for example, we actually did football stadium audiences, which is one of the hardest audiences, to actually convince. And obviously largely male, a bit more resistant to the whole message. And we did a test in terms of what worked the most. So we went in like with the whole anti-red meat thing, like give meat the red card type of thing, and the damage it's doing to you. And we'd sort of use football sloganizing, but we did also go in on environmental issues and animal issues as well. And it wasn't as... what would you think was the most effective? You're probably going to say, I'm going to guess, health?
I'd say ethics. I always say ethics. That's what I always
with that crowd, though.
Yeah,
I'd
that
probably
crowd.
Say maybe environmental for some reason.
A lot of middle-aged men.
Sure. Environmental is my guess, because it's neutral. They don't want to think about their health or animals too much, so they're like, well, I know environmental is one of those popular topics. That's what I would guess anyway.
I'm going to switch my guess to protein.
Yeah. So the first thing that made it easier to start the conversation, to start open it, was health, because they didn't find it threatening. And they kind of heard that you should reduce your red meat, and went in with the kind of iconic figures who are vegan that surprised them. But what we found over and over, that's not enough to convince them to really change. So it's the other issues that you'd bring into the conversation, but the health was the really useful one to just open that conversation.
Yeah.
So it is interesting.
You brought something else to my mind. I seen something recently. I can't remember the name, but it was research that said men, when they feel their masculinity dipping, they eat more red meat. It's like a subconscious thing to... I'm not too sure why, but it's definitely, it ties in with that, doesn't it?
Well, it's because organizations whose job is to promote meat have played on that for literally decades and decades and decades. And there's been some very blatant campaigns that have actually said that basically meat is macho. And it feeds into this very deep psyche, man the hunter. And underneath it all, there's this deep psychological attachment, if you like, from men, that they're the one protecting the family, and part of protecting the family is to provide the meat. So it's a very, very deep thing, that's quite a hard thing to tackle in the way that dairy was for us for many, many years. It's like it's like attacking something that is so fundamental, because a woman produces milk when she has a baby. How can you attack that food that the whole of the human race is utterly reliant upon? And and so you there as an organisation, as Viva, you're having to pick apart the different threads of how they're being fooled and marketed to, and you have to do the same with Meat is Macho. And so one of the ways to do that, going back to the football audience, is to use like blokes who have made that switch. So Lewis Hamilton would be a very really good example today, because most blokes admire that. Most blokes, I am making huge generalizations here, apologize, but want see themselves being a racing driver and winning that race. It's an attractive image for most men. And he's very outspoken, so you can use directly some of the quotes that he said. In fact, he promoted Hogwood on his Instagram page, which was fantastic. But there are many examples of that. So you go in where your strengths lie, and turn them around and start you start telling people, look, you've been lied to. All these years you've been lied to, because in fact what meat does, it causes impotence in men, because it clogs your arteries and makes it harder for you to get a hard on. And you have to challenge these things directly, excuse the pun again, head on, and start switching it around and showing vegans are sexy and more likely to be sexual, and why that is the case. And then everybody's ears start pricking up, women and men, and you're thinking, have we been lied to? This starts to make sense. And the more that they dig into it themselves, they see what the truth is. But it's basically what I said. You are fighting many years of a lot of money. So you're talking, remember, not just Britain, worldwide, you're talking many millions of pounds spent making people think a certain way about their product.
Laughing at that comment that somebody just put, to your point.
What did they say?
I'm not going to read it. It's on the screen if you can see it.
I can't actually. What does it say? Oh yeah.
That's a friend of mine. So nice one, James. So we're on to our last question, I think now.
Just before we move on to the last one, I just want to say, in terms of the most effective form of activism, I think it would be fair to say it's a case-by-case basis, but the most important thing is that you just say something or do something and don't worry too much about it being imperfect, because you'll learn from your efforts, how to improve it. Would you say that would be fair?
Exactly. I mean, if you're just doing something, if you can't target your audience sort of like as neatly as, say, a school class, and so you're just on the streets and you're meeting everybody, you accept that the message that you're given isn't going to be the one that reaches their heart instantly, but for a certain percentage, it is. And at the end of the day, you're just telling the truth. So just be proud of what if pride's the right word. Be confident in what you're saying and what you're doing, because the world needs you. Those animals need you. In fact, sometimes I've done things that are really difficult and really challenge me personally, and where my own comfort zones, I've just thought about the animals inside those farms, and I've just thought, what I'm going through is nothing compared to them. And it sounds a little bit sort of like trite, but I really do use that mechanism. It does help me personally.
Yeah.
Can I just interject with a question just before we ask the last question? Did you do an ice cream van as well? Did Viva do a vegan ice cream?
I was going to bring this up.
The reason I'm asking is because Thomas, the local ice cream man, comes and parks outside his door, and God help Thomas, he goes and talks to him every time he comes and is trying to convert him to selling vegan ice cream. So I was just doing the mathematics in my head thinking, you need to get a vegan ice cream van and park it beside his.
Yeah, it's exactly what you're saying though. He's been coming for a while, and I've experienced not doing anything in the face of it, and it's made me feel disempowered and frustrated. And I've sat with that feeling, and I just don't want to feel like that ever again. And it's weird because, like, when we do activism in the street, it's a neutral ground, so it's okay when people are stepping to you. But I'm actively approaching him and telling him what I think about what he's, helping. And it's right at my doorstep. And so I decided I'm going to do something about this because it's frustrating. And even though the guy isn't really getting the message, I can still say with a clear conscience that I'm doing something, I'm doing the right thing, and I'm raising my voice. And it's going to snowball into something, whether it's vegan ice cream or he's not coming back into the street.
You're not shouting at him, by the way. You're talking to him politely.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say, we hired an ice cream van for the length of the tour. Obviously, it was in several cities across the UK. But in your case, you can hire an ice cream van and you get them painted. I mean, I love that ice cream van. I so want to buy that permanently for Viva. Going along the motorway, people are beeping their horns and waving to you,
Wow.
and you got the old style,
Like
sort of
the
bell tunes and all the
fancy
rest of
writing
it. So
stuff.
it's,
Yeah.
people loved it, and they come up and there's all these different flavors of vegan ice creams, and
Wow.
people cannot get enough of it. They really want to try it, and it
Need
opened
to
all the
rival this guy.
conversations. It was part of our Scary Dairy campaign. It opened up all those
Yeah.
conversations.
Yeah.
So I would say do that, because people, the public, love being given free food, and
Yeah.
you can have all your messages on the ice cream van. Why dairy, so harmful. Honestly, I can say from direct personal experience, because I went to some of them, that it was one of the most successful things we've ever done. So if you need any help with that, sort of afterwards, if you want to email me, I'll tell you how we sort of went about that. But it was really,
Totally.
really successful. And I bet if you did that and sort of challenged him head on about having your own, van there for, even if it's only for one weekend,
Yeah.
you could get local radio and news
get
coverage,
or something.
and maybe
Turf
set up
wars.
a Facebook page just for it or something, and so on.
Yeah, that was his argument. He had just bought this, like, it does look really cool, and he said, I have to pay this off, blah, blah, blah. But he was just spouting half-truths and no empathy, using the same old excuses. We've been doing this forever, and people need to eat, and I need to feed my kids, and just ducking the questions and ignoring the ethics, But I would love to turn up in a vegan ice cream van. I said to him about like soy whip. Man, you need to get some.
Well, lunch and go
vegan ice cream.
Thomas's ice cream van. You just park nose to nose when he pulls up.
I'll definitely speak to you about it after.
Okay.
Do you want to do the last question then, and we'll let Juliet get with you?
Yeah. So last question is, what's next for you and Viva?
So the next long-running campaigns are vegan now. So we're looking at the environmental impact of consuming animals and really going in hard on that. And we're going to open it out because a lot of our audience are empathetic to animals. So we're going to show how killing farmed animals to eat is literally killing pretty much all wildlife, and making that connection between the two in some hard-hitting, imaginative and creative different ways. There are all different facets to that. Awesome. And the other one is End Factory Farming Before It Ends Us is a big campaign. We've got many different parts to that with a 2-year strategy, lots and lots of different things going on. We are basing it on COVID not getting in the way of all this. So we may have to adapt all our plans again, but hopefully not. But yeah, lots of different facets to that. And as I told you at the start, I can't talk much about this. I'm personally writing a book at the moment, which is a big project for me, which I've put off for about 10 years. But I'm not going to say any more about that because it'd probably take me another 10 years at this rate to write it, because there's so much going on at Viva. The other thing that we're doing, which is a side we've not talked about at all, we run something called the Vegan Recipe Club, which is hugely popular now. So a lot of the promotions that we do around that, which are very we're using a lot of humor at the moment, to bring meat eaters into the audience. So a lot of the advertising for that you'd never see, because we just focus on meat reducers. So a lot of what Viva does, a lot of the ads that we do, we are pumping stuff out at the moment. We've got about 4 different, no more than that, out right now across all social media platforms, so YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, blah 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 blah. But we pay to go to meat reducing audiences, not vegans. So a lot of what we do, vegans don't actually see, because that's our role.
Targeting people who are like most likely to get it because they're already on the way. That makes sense.
Exactly. The door's already a little bit open, but maybe they've just given up red meat, but they're now eating chicken and fish. All those kind of things, or whatever. They're on that road of compassion, but they're nowhere near veganism yet. So we're pushing at them, coming in at them from all different angles. So we're just about
to cover all the bases.
Yeah, we're doing one on anti-dairy, which is a really powerful ad that leaves a lot to your imagination, but it's quite sinister. But the response to that is well above normal YouTube rates in terms of people watching it all the way through. So we know we're having an impact. On the Vegan Now one, we've got the voiceover of myself, Greta Thunberg, and George Monbiot. And the response to that is absolutely incredible. In fact, it's one of the most successful things we've done in terms of reaching a very wide audience, including teenagers and people in their 20s. So that's looking at the fact that time is running out in terms of wildlife extinctions, what I just touched upon. Again, amazing, the links that we're getting to our website from that, it just incredible. So there's lots of different things from the different aspects, but we're focusing very much on the cruelty in factory farms, the disease risk from factory farms, and the fact that we're about to wipe out all the world's wildlife if we don't change. We're doing a lot less on health at the moment, and loads on the food itself. So we're really investing in the Vegan Recipe Club. The reason that we're doing that is because so many meat eaters are responding to the Recipe Club, and then we can draw them in to the issues themselves, whilst we're convincing them that actually this is a good way to eat because it's actually damn good. Our recipes are bloody damn good, and they're easy, and all the rest of it. We've done guides for students in the last few months, and we've done a guide to cheap vegan food as well, to show, because one of the cliches is veganism is more expensive, and of course it does not have to be. So we're tackling that as well. So lots of things going on.
Jeez, that's really impressive. That's so much.
Juliet,
it's like a small army.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Viva is a very dynamic, very, very busy organisation, which is why I haven't been able to get the time to write this book, because there's always something really pressing to do, and in essence, it's a campaigning organisation. That's what we are, and of course, the issues are just so important.
Yeah, for sure.
The work you've done. We're going to wrap up now, I think. Yeah, and let you get on about your evening. I want to, first of all, thank you for giving up your time this evening. It's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you. I've really enjoyed this tonight. I'm sure you have.
It's been really fun.
You've been
talking about some serious stuff, but we had a laugh too.
But not just for tonight, Juliet, for everything you've done and all that you continue to do. I just want to thank you for that. It's absolutely amazing, and I feel inspired talking to you tonight. It's
excellent.
Are we getting that ice cream van?
Yeah, you've got to do it. You'll love it.
I'm serious about it. Like, if we can.
Well, I want to ask her about how she bribes people to get them to watch.
Let's just send the ice cream.
Yeah, look, for everything that you've done, thank you so much.
Listen, I'll use any technique. It's for the animals. Come on.
Okay. I'll buy that.
That's so good.
Do you want to wrap the show up then?
I mean, I don't know. I think we're going around in circles, but I could give you 100,000 thank yous, and you already know how good you are, and you're always going to keep going until the casket drops. So thank you so much. Thank you for being such a huge inspiration. You're wonderful to talk to. I've really enjoyed myself, and I'm sure he has.
Yeah, I could say
people watching. Thank you for watching. You are so important. Like, you're the most important part of this. If no one was watching, we'd just be chatting to ourselves. So thanks for the people that keep.
Just mention that it's viewable afterwards. Like, it's not just.
Yeah, that as well.
This will be on the page, Juliet, afterwards as well. So it's always viewable at all times. If anybody goes to the page and wants to see it, they can. It's always there. So.
Sure.
So thank you again very much.
Thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed it too.
Okay.
Awesome.
Cool. I'm going to end the broadcast here. If you want to hang around a second, we can talk to you for a couple of seconds before you go. And just thank everybody for watching, and we'll see you next week. Yeah,
thanks so much, people. Next week, we mentioned next week.
No, we don't. We do have a guest, but we
have a good guest for next week too, but stay tuned anyway. And thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.